So this is Vibrio cholera. These are also bacilli, bacteria, rod-shaped, but they have a flagella. And these are excellent swimmers. In fact, they are waterborne illnesses, and they have a tendency to result in widespread outbreaks. So, back in the good old days, when, the idea of good advice, good medical advice, was to abstain from cold water when heated, and above all from ardent spirits, and if habit have rendered them indispensable, take much less than usual. In other words, if you can't stop drinking, try to drink less. That's like the best you can do. Really? Okay, sure. Anyway, but cholera has a really high death toll. We'll talk about this a lot more in Unit 5, but this is from a newspaper article in 1849. In a matter of 16 days, there were 102 cases, 25 people recovered, 14 were dying, 30 died, 39 were remaining under treatment. And it affected women, girls, men, and boys entirely. The people who died first were the men, because it was happening in the workhouse where the men were. So they died first. Then the women and children got sick. Because guess who was taking care of the men? The women. Guess who was taking care of the children? The women. So guess who got sick? Everybody. Yeah, lots of people died. So the entire town, 63 people had died. 34 had died, but 63 cases. My apologies, misreading. So now let's talk about viruses. We've talked about cells up to this point. I want to stress something. Viruses are absolutely by no means cells. Viruses are not cells. I even put a does not equal right there. They challenge our very perception of what is a living thing. So, living things, once again, as we said just a little bit before, they must perform the following They must perform the following things. They must perform the following functions. They must obtain nutrition. They must respire. They must excrete wastes. They must transport. They must transport themselves or something. Or some non-self out, or transport non-self, and they must reproduce. Viruses do not obtain nutrition. They do not produce energy from that nutrition that they don't obtain. And they certainly don't excrete waste because they certainly don't respire. But they can sort of transport their genetic material in some species of viruses, if you can call them species, from their capsule into cells. And they can definitely reproduce. They are the best at reproduction. They put rabbits to shame. So viruses currently occupy a very special place in biology. They are complex entities. They are not cells. They do not meet the criterion for living beings, but they reproduce and they evolve. So we have not discussed evolution in these lessons, and we won't discuss evolution as part of AS level biology, because the 2016-18 curriculum has that for A level. So the question becomes a philosophical one. Are viruses alive? And that's a legitimate question. Are viruses alive? So you could argue in either direction on this one, and I am not going to say that I'm a philosopher. I don't believe I am, so I'm not. So I'm not going to argue this question. What I will talk about, however, is the basic structure of a virus. I'm going to talk about the basic structure of a virus using a plant virus as an example. So they have a capsid, which is known as a protein coat. A protein coat houses genetic material in the form of either DNA or RNA. That's right, their genetic material can be RNA instead of DNA. They even break that rule, that their storage molecule for inheritance is now RNA instead of DNA. So it's never both, although sometimes it's come kind of close. There are some articles out there that suggest some things, but it's never both at the same time. Interestingly though, viral DNA and RNA don't follow the normal rules either. So you can have a single-stranded DNA virus or a double-stranded RNA virus. It is possible. It is crazy. So any additional structures or machinery in a virus may be present depending on the identity of the virus, but let's look at that picture before we get fancy. We've got a protein coat, which is made up of these protein subunits. We've got some DNA inside this protein coat, and that's it. That's it. All the DNA has to do is carry genes for taking over a cell that it enters, producing the protein coat, and that's all it's got to do. That's it. That's all it has to do. Make protein coat, replenish DNA, package DNA in protein coat, remove virus from cell. Remove new viruses from cell. That's all it has to do. So you can have very simple things be viruses. Very simple genes. Just a few genes. And you've got yourself a virus. Now let's take a look at our more visually interesting viruses. Plant viruses can be quite interesting, but visually our more interesting viruses are our bacteriophages, which, as you might tell from the name, eat bacteria, although eating them is a fancy way of saying infect them. And animal viruses. Influenza is our prime example of our animal viruses. Now, both of these examples, they have a protein coat, and they have some nucleic acid as their genetic material. Those conditions are met. Now, in bacteriophages, the DNA, double-stranded DNA, is our genetic material. In the influenza virus, interestingly enough, it's a RNA material that is our genetics, that is our genetic material of choice. Now we've got some additional stuff here. In a bacterial virus, in a bacteriophage virus, we have a tail. This whole thing is the tail. These fibers at the end are like the fimbriae. They help attach that virus to the bacteria, and these spikes over here will help punch through that bacteria. And the genetic material will be injected into the cell from the capsid, leaving behind the protein coat on the outside. But the genetic material will be injected into the cell. In an animal virus, we have this membrane envelope on the outside. Now, this membrane envelope, that outer envelope is very similar to a cell surface membrane. This is going to help that virus to trick that cell into letting them into that cell as a very cunning plan to murder that cell, rip it apart, and wear its organelles as a hat. Never trust a virus, sleep in fear. This particular monster is human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. This is an RNA virus, a retrovirus, not because it was discovered in the, it was first described and discovered in the 80s, so it's so retro, but because it takes RNA, it has a protein in here called reverse transcriptase, which reverses the transcript of RNA and turns it into DNA. And then it puts that DNA and attaches it to your genetic material. And it allows the HIV virus to be replicated along with your own DNA. So it becomes part of you. It splices itself into you until a certain time. And then it's going to replicate like mad, rip apart your cell, and then, well, disperse and infect the next cells, leaving you, unfortunately, sicker in the process. Now, on the outside of this membrane coat, will have glycoproteins and lipid membrane, and those glycoproteins are going to be little spikes that help that virus be recognized by the cell as self. So the cell cannot distinguish between virus and invader. And it will allow the virus into the cell. And the virus will take advantage of the cell's hospitality and begin to murder it. So never trust viruses. Pause the video.